everyone. Happy Wednesday to you, and good morning, or good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It sounds like we've got a great group of folks from all over the world, so we're excited to have you here. And thank you for coming back to part 2 of our 4-part masterclass series. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get right into it with a little bit about us if you're unfamiliar. And yeah, we'll just get right started right now. So a little bit about us. If you are not familiar with us, we are Lulu. So Lulu, not just a fun word to say, but actually a word. And it means a remarkable person, object, or idea. So we are located in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. We have less than 100 employees, so we are a small but mighty team over here at Lulu. And we were founded by entrepreneur Bob Young. So if you're not familiar with Bob Young, you may know of Red Hat Software. So Bob Young was the co-founder of Red Hat. After going through his experiences at Red Hat, he wanted to write a book about it. Found the experience of publishing very laborious, very expensive. There's a lot of gatekeepers, a lot of hurdles to overcome to get your book out there. And through that process, he kind of wound up with a Vanity publisher and had to order thousands of copies of his book just to get it out there. So through that, he just felt like there's a better way to do this process. There had to be a way to make it more accessible and easier for people to get their stories out there. And that is what led him to found Lulu. So our mission is that we are dedicated to making the world a better place, one book at a time, through sustainable practices, innovative print-on-demand products, and a commitment to excellent service. So a little bit more about us is that we are a B Corp. So this is one of my favorite things about Lulu, but we are a B Corp, which means that we're a for-profit company certified by the nonprofit B Lab to meet rigorous standards of social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. So if you are not familiar with B Corps, I highly recommend that you take a look at who all is in that community. There's some really great brands that are working to make the world a better place and just be held to a higher ethical standard and help this planet that we all live on. So if you're looking for a product, I would recommend looking in the B Corp catalog to see if you can spend your dollars a little bit smarter with those folks. So next up, I just wanted to recap from last week. So last week we talked about the 5 things you need to know before you publish. So just as a little refresher, the things that we went over included the goals for your book, your audience, your budget, your timeline, and the elements of your publishing team. So if you're unable to join us for that one, you can find the whole recording on our YouTube channel. So if you just search Lulu Press on YouTube, that'll come up for you. And I really just kind of wanted to put this out there as a reminder because a lot of the things that we talk about today and that we touch on will build off of last week's webinar, as next week's will build off of this one. So if there's ever a time or a week that you miss, please just visit our YouTube channel and you'll be able to find the full recordings there. All right, so now you are ready to publish. And what kind of publisher are you looking for? How do you know what type of publisher you'll need for your project? So those questions and more will be answered on this edition of Team Lulu Masterclass. So in this webinar, we're going to go over all the questions you should be asking of any potential publishing partner. But first, let's meet these disembodied voices that will be speaking to you for the rest of the hour. So first up is me. I'm Chelsea, and I am the Brand Engagement Manager.
The Marketing Associate.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I am the Social Media Manager.
And I'm Paul. I'm the copywriter.
That is true. So now I'm going to kick it over to Lauren, who will get us started with publishing options.
So before we can start determining or talking about how to determine what kind of publishing is right for you, it's important that we understand the difference between the different types of publishing options available. So when people talk about publishing, they often tend to default to the topic of traditional publishing. But there are really 3 different avenues of publishing to consider. So as an author, you have the option of exploring all 3 of these. And of course, you're not confined to any one option either. So we're going to take a look at these 3 main avenues of publishing today. And those are traditional publishing, self-publishing, and hybrid press or vanity press publishing. So Chelsea, if you could go ahead to that next slide. Thank you. All right, first thing we're going to talk about is traditional publishing. And like I said, it's probably what you think of when you think of publishing in general. So there are 5 major publishers that are responsible for the overwhelming majority of traditionally published books. Those are Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, and Hachette. But there are also plenty of comparatively smaller publishers like Scholastic, Bloomsbury, Sourcebooks, Kensington, that are also contributing to the traditional publishing community. So traditional publishing, as you probably know, is often considered the most quote-unquote legitimate publishing option, especially by most of the stuck-up literary snobs in the industry. But in the last few years, there have been a dramatic rise in authors that are turning to other publishing options instead, most likely because traditional publishing is the least flexible option of all of them, as well as being the option with the most roadblocks to success. So I'm going to highlight a couple of the major differences between traditional publishing and self-publishing. One of those is that traditional publishing is an experience that has gatekeepers pretty much every step of the way. So think about just even the process of getting into traditional publishing. These days, most publishing houses don't accept unsolicited manuscripts, which means you first need to query and sign a contract with an agent. That agent then needs to shop your book around to find an editor that might be interested. And that editor then needs to pitch the book to their sales department for permission to acquire it. So you've now had to get your book through 3 different approval processes before you've even started your publishing journey. Another key difference is the revenue control. So traditional publishers will pay an author in advance for a contract, which means technically you're getting more money up front, but an author will have to sell through their entire advance before they see any additional profits from book sales. Plus, the publisher is obviously going to take a significant portion of any book sales, leaving less overall for you as the author. Another major difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing is that you have your publishing team already in place from the start. So for some authors, this is a pro. You've finished your book, you can hand it off to an editor who will whip it into shape, a copy editor to clean it up and format it, a cover designer, a publicist, and a sales team. Your work is largely done. Once you finish the manuscript, you'll be expected to do some marketing on your own, but you'll have the support of an in-house publishing team behind you. However, for some authors, this is a significant con because this publishing team, unlike the one that you might put together for yourself as a self-published author, doesn't work for you. You work for them. So you've surrendered a significant amount of control over your book by handing it off to a traditional publisher. And for some authors, that loss of control isn't worth it. So for self-publishing, if you're here, you're probably at least a little bit familiar with what self-publishing is. You found us, after all. A self-publishing platform like Lulu is essentially do-it-yourself publishing. So depending on which self-publishing platform you choose, they will offer you a variety of different publishing options and add-ons, but at a bare bones level, self-publishers are the printer and distributor for your book. The 3 most obvious ways that self-publishing differs from traditional publishing, like we covered already, are the publishing gatekeepers, the revenue, and the lack of a publishing sales team or a publishing team, which of course means the return of creative control for the author. So if you're talking about the barriers or the gatekeeping in self-publishing, there are none. Everyone with a story is welcome to share theirs. There are no agents to sign with, no editors to impress, no sales teams that you have to pitch. If you have a book to share and the know-how to make it happen, you can self-publish. It's that simple. Self-publishing revenue will also vary. It's going to vary pretty much very dramatically based on which self-publishing platform you choose and what type of distribution you choose, which we will talk about more in a little bit. But overall, self-publishing will have a much higher return per sale for the author's revenue. Of course, on the flip side, there is no advance for a self-published author, so you won't see any revenue until you start selling your book. And of course, the last one is that unlike traditional publishing, the author is responsible for every step of the publishing process, whether it's editing, formatting, creative design, publicity, sales, whatever. So this isn't to say that the author has to do it themselves. If you were here for our last webinar, you heard us talk about building your publishing team and how to focus on areas that you'll need assistance with. But it is a much more do-it-yourself style publishing, which again can be a pro and a con depending on the author. Some authors we know find it overwhelming to be responsible for so much of the publishing process. We do our hardest, or we work our hardest, to provide all kinds of different resources to help you out with editing, formatting, marketing, publicity, and sales. But we know it can be a very daunting process too. But for some authors, the complete creative control over their projects, sales, and marketing are exactly what they want and what they need. So that leaves us with vanity press or hybrid press publishing, which is the middle ground between the two. There will be a pretty dramatic difference in what a specific vanity press or hybrid press will offer you based on which ones you're looking at. So it's hard to give a really, really specific example, but a broad range explanation is that vanity publishers offer authors all the perks of and services of traditional publishing, but at a cost. So while there aren't the barriers that you'll see in traditional publishing, there's no gatekeeping in vanity presses and hybrid presses. The potentially bigger barrier here is going to be the cost. They will offer you services for a publisher, editorial, marketing assistance, creative support, etc. But those services will cost you anywhere between several hundred and several $1,000s, and you are paying for that out of pocket as the author with no support from a publishing company. So now that we're a little bit clearer on the different types of publishing out there, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the things to consider while deciding which publisher is right for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Okay. So up next, we're going to talk about upfront costs, minimums, or fees. How scary. So, as you look for a publisher, it's important to be clear on what you're looking for and the things that you need, because as Lauren alluded to, when you kind of get in the process of publishing, there's so much that you don't know or that you may not have really considered. And so it can be easy for, publishers to sort of slide things in there that may not be necessary, that you might not need, or that may be overpriced. So, when you go to a publishing websites, and again, we always encourage you to do your research. But when you go to these websites, sometimes it's kind of unclear as to what these things are going to cost. And so through our research and our experience with working with so many authors, this next slide that I put together is sort of a culmination of what we've seen folks be surprised by or get tripped up by when it comes down to the budget and the pricing piece of their kind of explorations into these other publishing options. So just things you'll want to consider as you go down the list of who you may want to work with for your next or current book project. All right, so you want to know what you're in for. So knowing what you're looking for before you start working with publishers is going to be really helpful along the way. A couple of things that you want to keep in mind and that you definitely want to look into are revenue per sale, distribution options, inventory, and copyright. And we're going to go into the revenue per sale and distribution options a bit more later in the webinar, but these are just things to kind of keep in mind if maybe you're making a short list of checkpoints as you kind of go through your options that are available to you. So this slide really goes hand in hand with the budget portion of last week's webinar. If you know your budget and knowing your budget, it's going to make it so much easier for you to find exactly what you're looking for and be able to, really clear out that list and get exactly what you need for this project. So pricing structures, as Lauren mentioned, and we'll talk more about, can vary quite a bit in this industry, but here are a few things to be on the lookout for across the board. So I would just recommend, as you are preparing to kind of interview or search for a publishing partner, have a list of questions, a standard list that you're going to ask for everyone. And then if you are looking for, self-publisher, that list may vary slightly from, working with a hybrid publisher or a vanity press, or even a traditional publisher. So things to be on the lookout for are sign-up fees, title setup fees, revisions, and order minimums. So for this first group, I just want to kind of highlight that, in our space, in our industry, there are a lot of different pricing structures, as I mentioned. So a couple of things that can add up quickly are, if you have to sign up to create an account or to put your title on a website or upload your title, that's something to think about. Is what they're offering on the other end of that worth that agreement or that price? Title setup fees. So if you have to pay to sign up and then you maybe have to pay for each title, that can be okay if you're only working with a small amount of projects. But, for Lulu specifically, we have authors that have published, upwards of 100, different projects on our site. And if you're paying to set up every single one of those titles, and of course, we always recommend to put it in multiple formats. So if you're setting up for every title, a hardcover, a paperback, and an ebook, that can add up really quickly. So you're going to want to be clear on what that looks like for the publisher you're working with. Another thing that we've seen in the industry are revision fees. So do you have to pay every time you want to revise your book? This may not be as big of a hindrance for a fiction author, that maybe you have something that that content's really not going to change. But for nonfiction authors, for our scholastic publishers or our professors and teachers who have things that have content that changes, per semester or could change multiple times during a year, this is something you're going to need to ask about, because as you're updating that content, you don't want to be hindered by, having to pay more and, let your content suffer or be outdated because you don't want to keep paying to keep it updated. So that's definitely something you're going to want to consider. The last one in this first section are order minimums. So again, depending on your goals and what you're looking for this project, it can be a really nice way to approach it by looking for a print-on-demand provider rather than an offset. So again, if you are publishing a book and you know that you're going to be selling thousands of copies, your audience, and the demand for the book, and it's in the several thousands, offset might be a great way. And working with a company that doesn't have any minimums, they may not matter. It may not come into effect. However, if you are working with on a project that's a bit more niche, or your target audience is on the smaller side, then order minimums can have huge implications to what publisher you're going to work with, and what that would mean for you as far as, okay, if I have to order 100 copies of this book and I'm really only planning to sell 50 just to start, how am I going to store those? Are they going to hold them for me? Well, I have to take on that inventory. What does that process look like? So that's another thing that I kind of think those are sort of a very quick and short list of some of the basics that you want to be looking into when you're starting out. So up next on this kind of be sure to ask about section, these items are definitely things that you're going to want to research for each publisher that you're considering. So Anna will be following up with the revenue section next, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll have another section on distribution as well. But these are 4 categories that you want to be 100% clear on before making your final decision. So again, in this list, revenue per sale. So that's, for most people, that's something they really want to be clear about, is when I sell a book through you, or when you help me make a sale, how much is going to you and how much is going to me? Also the copyright. So how much am I giving up? How much of creative control am I signing away? So as Lauren kind of alluded to with self-publishing and some of these other models, you as the author, you take on 100% of that. You're making all the creative decisions. You're holding the copyright. All the content is yours from beginning to end. And that can be really liberating and provide a lot of flexibility for an author. However, if you want to bring on a partner or work with, a publisher who's going to take on some of that copyright or take some of that creative control away, you may be okay with that. You may be at the point where you think, I worked on this book, I wrote it. That's pretty much as far as I want to go with it. Now I want somebody else to kind of work on the other piece, and that could be fine. So you want to get clear on the copyright. Who holds the copyright? What does that mean? What kind of copyright is, have they filed for? That kind of thing. Then up next is distribution. So are they going to be able to distribute the book for you, or is that going to be handled on your own? Again, depending on your goals for the book, either path can work, but just kind of knowing what their stance is will make it easier for you to kind of navigate that relationship. And so POD versus offset. So I touched on this in the first section, but POD just is print on demand, which just means that the book is printed as orders come through. So we see that this model can be really advantageous for authors who don't want to worry about inventory, who want to kind of have the e-commerce piece taken care of possibly by somebody else. We'll talk about some other options for that a bit later. And then offset is really for these authors who are publishing books that they know thousands of copies are going to be sold. So this doesn't just mean that you have an audience of independent readers, that number in the thousands. This could also be that, again, you're writing something that in an academic context, so schools and universities and university libraries are going to be purchasing this book in bulk. So that's a couple examples of why offset may be more appealing. And then this last part is red flags. So under red flags, this is just a list of things that might indicate the publisher does not have your best interest in mind. Not in every case. So again, it's really up to you to do your research. But here I've listed some examples and some commonalities we've seen from authors who have had bad experiences with their publishing partners. So publishers that ask you to pay upfront for services. So this should be, maybe a yellow flag. So maybe before you put down that down payment, you're really looking with a fine tooth comb of what all am I getting for this? Am I under contract? How long will that last? What does this mean that I'm paying this money? So you want to cover all those bases before you fork over a large or even a small amount of money to a publisher. So publishers who seem to be over promising. So, we've seen at Lulu that people get involved with, service-based companies or companies who really kind of promise you the moon and then, are really unable to deliver those things. So if you kind of get into these conversations with publishers and it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And the great thing about, this internet that we have at our fingertips is that you can pretty easily do a search and kind of hear from other people who have had experiences with those publishers. And usually you can get some really good feedback about people they've worked with in the past. And then the last thing is package-based providers. So I may be a bit biased coming, speaking to this as a Lulu employee because that's not our model. Everything is pretty much a la carte. And so, working with a package-based provider, again, can be fine if that aligns with your outcome or your intention or desired outcome for your project. But you may want to approach it in a different way and do things more a la carte so that you can really build the experience that you're looking for specifically for that book. So if you see, if you come across a publisher who on their website, they have multiple packages listed, usually if that's the case, they start in the thousands, which again, could be fine for the path that you're on, but it's all about doing your research and really being intentional about who you're working with and if what they have going on can align and support the vision you have for your book. Take a look at this dog. He's got his tie on. He's doing all of his research. He's doing everything right. So I would just recommend that you guys do the same and just keep these things in mind. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, create your short list of things that you can negotiate, things that you have to have, things that you absolutely don't want, and let that guide you through these conversations. So next, I will kick it over to Anna to talk about how much revenue you can make.
Everyone, now before you choose the publisher and settle down with them, you want to make sure you've done your research and know how much revenue you are going to make per sale, right? Because that's the goal, to make money and to make a profit. You don't want to go with just any publisher. I know the last thing I want is to work really hard on a book and then realize that the publisher I chose makes more of a profit than I do. I have a hunch you guys feel the same way, which is why it's important to know the revenue splits of each company you are considering. Today, I'm really talking to your wallets. If you want to earn money by selling your books, you need to make the smart decision that puts the most into your pocket, which is why I'll be going over the revenue splits for self-publishing companies and traditional publishing. Chelsea, if you can move to the next slide.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Okay, so the first self-publishing company I want to talk about is BookBaby. Now, depending on the retail price of your title and the specs of your book, most titles will generate between 10 to 30% in royalties. That's a wide range and not really specific like other companies are when discussing revenue splits. But if you're getting between 10 to 30% of revenue, that means BookBabies and the retailers are splitting 60 to 90%. However, if you're only selling on BookBaby, then you will earn 50% of the revenue. So let's break this down and say that we have a 6x9 book, black and white interior, and 100 pages in total. We list this book for $15. If you're only selling on BookBaby, you will get $7.50. But if you're selling through distribution services, you would get $3.45. Next on my list is KDP. Many people who I've come across want to originally publish with KDP because it's Amazon, and everyone wants their book on Amazon. More people looking at your book equals more money, right? Well, this is not necessarily true. You can be a published author on Amazon and still make very little money, even if you are on their catalog and many customers are looking through it every day. Though, when you do begin your research on revenue splits, Amazon is very transparent about how much money you can make on their website. So I genuinely have to give them that. But let's dive right into how much money you can potentially make if you choose to publish with KDP. KDP offers a fixed 60% royalty rate on paperbacks sold on Amazon marketplaces where KDP supports paperback distribution. Your royalty is 60% of your list price. They then subtract the printing costs, which depend on page count, ink type, and the Amazon marketplace your paperback was ordered from. If you enable expanded distribution, the royalty is 40% of the book's list price, effective in the distribution channel at the time of purchase, minus printing costs. So, for example, if a book was sold on Amazon and the list price is $15, let's say your book is a 333-page paperback with black ink, and you would receive only $4.15. But if you went through distribution with the same book, you would only receive $1.15. As you can see, you do make less money on Amazon per sale, but it's really up to you if you want to weigh the pros and cons when deciding if you should publish with them or not. If you could just move to the next slide. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to Ingram Spark. The first point I want to make when beginning your research on revenue splits, Ingram Spark is one of the hardest self-publishing companies to find out that information. Additionally, they don't explicitly say what the percentages are, what they get versus what you get on your book. The only way to find out what you could potentially make on Ingram Spark is if you go to their publisher comp calculator. But it doesn't break down the price, and it doesn't show you what you can make in distribution. However, I went ahead and got a sample so we can get an idea of how much you can make on their website. Let's say we're making a 6x9 book again with a black and white interior, and it has 200 pages in total. The book price is $3.66, and we want to list it for $14.95. You would make about $6.80 per copy when it sells according to the comp calculator. If you go on the website and enter in your own book specs, you will see the exact profit you can make on Ingram. Now, $6.80 is not a bad profit per copy, but if you shop around a bit more, you can find out a publishing company that gives you a better profit. This leads me into my next section, and that's Lulu. Let's be very transparent here. Lulu is a for-profit company too, like the rest of the self-publishing companies. We make money when you make money, but our revenue split is different from the rest. If you sell a print book on Lulu, you get 80%. That's an 80-20 revenue split. If you sell an ebook on Lulu, you get a 90% of the revenue, and we get 10%. So, for example, let's say you have a 200-page print book. The print cost would be $5.25, and you want to list your book for $14.95. That means you would make $7.76 in profit on each book that was sold. Now, honestly, that's a good deal. However, if you were to go through distribution channels, it would be a bit different. If you sell on our distribution channels for that same book priced at $14.95, you would make a profit of $1.58 with each copy sold. The major loss of revenue for selling through retailers is their share. This is the price set by retailers to list your book. This is the premium you pay to have your book listed on Amazon and our other distribution channels. But at the end of the day, if you sell on Lulu, you'll be getting more money back than you would on any other self-publishing company. But if you're looking to still sell your books on other channels, you can definitely do that too. I'm sorry.
Was that too eager? I'm sorry, Anna.
Yeah, can you move to the next slide, please? My bad.
Oh, sure.
As Lauren mentioned previously, traditional publishers will pay an author in advance for a contract. So technically, you're getting more money up front, but an author will have to sell through their entire advance before they see any additional profits from book sales. Plus, the publisher is going to take a significant portion of any book sales, leaving less overall for the author. Traditional publishers like the Big Five do something like 25% to the author for both ebooks and print copies, but with the advance. For first-time authors, the advance is about $2,000, which means that the author will not see any of those royalties until after the publisher has made back on their advance. Once they made back their advance, the authors are still only getting 25%, and the publishers are getting the rest of the profit. For small press companies like Bean and Rocking Horse, there won't be an advance, and an author will still get probably 25% from print copies, but e-copies should pay out between 33% and 50%. So traditional publishing is different from self-publishing because of the advances, but you would really need to do your own research if you're interested in going this route, because each publisher is different with the advances and the percentages of profit you would receive. So, in conclusion, you can actually make money with your book. Whether you're a fiction author, an entrepreneur, an educator, a dancer, a chef, or any of the other dozen professions that can lead to publishing. Whatever it is, you can make income with your book. But how much money you make also depends on the revenue split. So, do your research, weighs out the pros and cons of each publishing company, whether it's self publishing or not, and then make the decision that will most benefit your wallet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. And so Paul is up next to talk about formats.
All right, so yeah, we're going to look a little bit at formats here, and specifically the different formats that these various publishers that Anna and Chelsea were just talking about, and how you can really narrow down which publisher you want to use based on the formats you need. Can you slide me to the, yeah, there we go. Okay, so when it comes to thinking about the formats you'll use for your book, there are two things your publisher is going to be doing. They're going to be printing the book and they're going to be distributing the book. Now, that doesn't include many of the other roles like editing and marketing and things like that that a publisher may partake in. But when you're just thinking about the formats your book will be in, those are the two main roles they're going to play. Next slide, please. Awesome. So here are a ton of random questions. And, honestly, there are more than this. There are so many different questions that go into thinking about your formatting and your design for your book. But I built this one here specifically just to kind of get your brain thinking about all of the different things that go into making a formatting decision. First up, what kind of book are you writing? Is it a novel? What kind of novel is it? Is it a romance, sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, historic? Or are you making a textbook, a magazine, a self-help book, creative nonfiction that really delves into like a historic event, or, an art book that's full of photography or your scans of art that you've created? There are just, hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of books that you could create. And each one kind of comes with its own specific formatting and print decisions to make. Those can go from very, very broad, such as do you make a paperback versus a hardcover, to incredibly granular, such as, what kind of paper you use. Do you use a white paper that maybe works better with the font that you're using for your science fiction book, or a cream paper that looks nicer with the drop caps you're using in your romance novel? It can really run the entire gamut of very, very simple and broad to very, very specific and detailed. And then you also have to kind of throw into that mix ebooks, which are another consideration that you'll want to have when you're deciding on the publisher and the formatting you'll use. And next slide, please. Awesome. All right. So what I've done with this slide and the next one is I've just kind of very, very high level looked at some of the things from a few different publishers that differentiate us in terms of formats. So since we're Lulu, we're going to start with Lulu because we're the best. There's my one shameless plug. I won't do it again. Okay, so we offer two kinds of ebooks: EPUB, which is your standard electronic book that will work on just about any kind of e-reader, and then PDF, which is obviously the very basic file type that is used for printing. Most e-readers will also use a PDF for viewing as well, and there are some types of books and documents that are best served as a PDF. The other thing that Lulu offers is a kind of broad range of print book types, from paperback, hardcover, saddle stitch, which is when the paper is folded and then stapled along the edge, and then coil bound, which is a plastic coil, which is great for like workbooks and things like that. So that is one of the big things to think about is when you're considering publishers like Lulu is, do you need something special like the hardcover or the coil bound? Are you writing a manual that needs to be able to lay flat so that someone can write in it? Are you creating a comic book that's going to be best served as a saddle stitch, that kind of thing? I like to set us next to Blurb, which is a very comparable company to Lulu. They also offer EPUB and PDF. They are limited in just paperback and hardcover, and that's because they specialize in higher end art type books, photo books, things like that. They really look to the higher end quality for things like photo books. They've got better, more options for your hardcovers to do like what do you call them, coffee table books, those sorts of things. They also have a really cool tool called Bookwrite that does some of the formatting and templating for you. So if you're not a professional cookbook designer, but you want to sell a cookbook that looks very much like, other cookbooks out there on the market, their tool might be good for that because you don't really have to know a lot of design specifics. They give you a bunch of very detailed templates, and you just throw your words and your images into them. So that's another thing to think about, is how you get to make your formatting decisions with that publisher. When you use Lulu, we let you do whatever you want and just send us a file. Some other publishers are more narrow, and that can be good for authors that are first time or that maybe don't want to make those design decisions. But if you've got a very specific design in mind, you need a publisher that can just accept any file type and will let you just send your PDF along and design it exactly the way you want. And then on this next slide, we have two of the other big publishers that you might consider. Ingram Spark Ingram is obviously the catalog service for most books out there in the world, and Ingram Spark is their self-publishing arm. They do EPUBs. They don't actually do PDF ebooks, which is a big thing for them because they are just distributing it, and it's really hard to distribute PDF ebooks. And then they focus on paperback and hardcover as well. They do offer saddle stitch, but it's a fairly limited range of size options there. What Ingram Spark has that some other publishers, and honestly most other self-publishers I've looked at, don't, is an enormous range of sizes for their books. You can do paperbacks in like 30 different sizes with them. So if you are writing, say, a poetry collection and you really, really want a very specific, weird size for your poetry book, you want it to be 5 1/4 by 8 or something like that, that's incredibly specific, Ingram Spark might be a good option because they're one of the only print-on-demand publishers that does offer that level of specificity. Most other self-publishers and print-on-demand companies are going to limit themselves to the most popular ones, things like A5, A4, 6x9, which is U.S. trade, those common sizes. Whereas Ingram's going to give you a huge range. And then last but not least is Kindle, which is Amazon's publishing arm. They are the most limited in your options. And they do that because they are basically designed to get your book as quickly as possible onto Amazon. They use ebooks in Mobi format, which is a little different than EPUB. It's a proprietary format, though they're interchangeable for the most part. And it's very easy to just take a file of either type and convert it with an online converter, or Calibre, which is a great EPUB editing tool that's also free. And then Kindle Direct also only offers print in paperback. They don't do hardcover, saddle stitch, any of that other kind of stuff. They're very, very specific in their, like I said, their goal to get you from a file to a listing on Amazon that can be sold as quickly as possible. And like I said, I just looked very broadly at the highest level of some of these formatting options that these publishing companies offer. And you can see from this kind of high level, there is a ton of variance and differences, and they've gone different directions based on what they want to offer. Lulu specifically knows that we cater to a lot of folks that want to do kind of a very DIY design and a lot of nonfiction authors. So we offer things that are useful for those kind of authors. Kindle knows that they're going to just have a lot of fiction, genre fiction. So they very specifically offer print for genre fiction, and they make it very easy to just take your file and get it up on their site. Once you kind of start to narrow down your list of print-on-demand publishers, and I would recommend looking at these 4 first, they're your biggest and most common ones out there. But once you start to narrow that list down, you then can also start to think about things like paper type, paper weight. Paper weight is a really interesting one that doesn't get a lot of attention. There's a fairly big difference between 50-pound and 60-pound paper, and you can't really tell until you handle a book that's made, the same book made on both. So that's a very important thing to think about, and especially if it really, really matters to you, your format, look into these things in detail, look at the products page on all of these websites, and also don't be afraid to get proof copies. Ingram is the only one, I believe, that has a setup fee. Blurb, Lulu, and KDP will all let you publish for free, and you could order a proof copy from all of them and compare and see which one you like better, see which one fits your needs best.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So the formatting section really dovetails nicely into this distribution piece that we're going to talk about now, because for some publishers and some providers and some outlets only take certain formats. So on Lulu, just as an aside, if you're looking at our formats, our distribution eligible formats, and you guys from Team Lulu keep me honest on this, but I think it's a green circle with a white check. And that indicates that it is available for distribution through our distribution partners. So for instance, Amazon and KDP don't do hardcover or coil bound. So one way to look at this, it could be that, if you want to do formats, a range of formats. So you may have a paperback, but you have a guide or some sort of supplementary material that goes with it that really lends itself to a coil bound format. So you put the paperback up on Amazon, and then you sell the coil bound, through another provider. It could be Lulu, it could be someone else. You could sell it through your own website. So that's why, I think that Paul did a great job of kind of walking you through the formats and doing a compare and contrast of some other providers out there. But one thing I would encourage you to think about is, looking at the distribution piece. And again, we kind of touched on this last week, but having that sort of long view of your project and where you want it to be and where you want it to end up. And the format that you choose can be a bit limiting in some capacities, because some distributors and platforms won't be able to carry or sell that format. So that's another great thing to think about as you are talking to potential publishers, is what formats do you offer? And again, the distribution piece, which we will get into now. So if you joined us last week, then this session is really built on a lot of the stuff that we talked about. I know I've iterated or reiterated that several times. And if you remember that we talked about goal setting last week, if you clearly outline your goals for the book you're working on, this distribution piece is going to be a lot easier for you to navigate. So I want to note here that when I say distribution, I'm referring to any sales channel available to you to sell your book. So you maybe work with a publisher that is essentially just helping you put the book together and print it, and distribution is up to you. And depending on your goals, that may be exactly what you need, and that's fine. But in the next slide, we're going to go a bit more in depth as to what you might want to look for in a publishing partner when distribution is concerned. Okay, so the number one question is, can they get your book to your readers? So, the great thing about the publishing landscape today, and specifically self-publishing or independent publishing, is that if you, the author, know you have an audience, you can publish that book and get it to your readers. Some publishing platforms or pathways, it's not that easy. For traditional publishing, you really have to have the numbers and a proven record of who you're selling to and where they are before they'll really take you on or be interested in your project. But for self-publishing, you could be the only one that knows where to find, your niche group of people who really want to read books about cats that love Pop-Tarts or whatever. So if you know those people exist, then that's all you have to know to get your book out there and distributed. Because if you know that niche of a group, then you probably know where they hang out and you can connect with them to get your book out there. However, you want to, as you're exploring the publishing, your publishing partners and your options, you're going to want to know if they can get your book in front of your readers. So, again, depending on your goals for the book and where your audience is, which is both things you should know. If you're at the point of looking for a publisher, you should definitely have your goals down and know your audience. But you'll want to ask your publishing partner or potential partner if they have a distribution network in place for your book, or if you're going to have to take care of that on your own. So there's a term in publishing called going wide. And this just refers to an author that's making their book available everywhere possible. And at Lulu, we always encourage our authors to do that because it's just the best way to reach the most people and drive the most sales. So we see, I think this is changing, but in the beginning, I would talk to a lot of people who felt like it was really either or when it would come to publishing platforms and distribution options. But the better way to look at it is really creating an ecosystem that works best for you and your book. And that can change for every book that you write. So I have here on this list, the digital retailers. So these are kind of the usual suspects when it comes to selling your book online. These are all great options. And as we have mentioned previously and in this webinar, they'll all give you different kind of revenue splits or opportunities per outlet. So the first four on here, Lulu, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Ingram, these are all, you could do ebooks on these sites as well, but there are, iBooks is really the only specific ebook distributor that I listed on here, but there's a plethora of them as well. So depending on your book and your formats, that's definitely something worth exploring. This list is not exhaustive. But I do want to note that if you're independently publishing or working with a small press, you're going to want to know if you can get listed on Ingram's catalog. So Paul mentioned this or alluded to this a bit when he touched on Ingram Spark. But Ingram Spark's parent company, Ingram Content Group, is really the only wholesaler in the game right now. So the majority of bookstores, libraries, and physical retailers buy their books from Ingram's catalog. So again, that kind of goes back to what I was mentioning about the format. So if your goal or one of your goals is to be in bookstores or libraries, then you're going to want to see what Ingram will accept for formats. And if you're not going directly through Ingram Spark, Lulu, for example, we have distribution through Amazon, Ingram, and Barnes & Noble, as well as a handful of others for ebooks. So if you're interested in being listed in those distribution outlets, you're going to want to make sure you pick one of those formats that is eligible for these outlets. So again, if libraries or bookstores are on your list, especially if they're chains, then Ingram is who you're going to want to look for because they will accept returns and kind of take on that wholesaler role that you would need to navigate that relationship. However, if you know of a local bookstore in your area that you maybe already have a great rapport with or that you really want to support and you'd like them to carry your book, just go talk to them about it. Getting your book into bookstores and other relevant shops isn't solely based on your listing in Ingram's catalog. For some, that's a big consideration, but for independent bookstores, it's often more about your personal connections with the shop and your ability to work out terms with them directly. So we have, there's a ton of great bookstores near us that we talk to and work with. And, we hear from them that, don't walk up to a bookstore you've never been in before and say, hey, can I get some shelf space? That's not going to work. So this really is about building community. And a lot of bookstores will offer, writing groups or book clubs or networking opportunities for folks in the literary community. So be involved with those, especially if you're kind of in the early phases of writing a book. Go ahead and start building those relationships so that when the book's published, it's not a random ask to go to a local and independent bookshop and say, hey, will you carry this book or could I do a signing here, and have that conversation with them. So be sure to lay that groundwork in the beginning. When you're working on these pieces to put together, have your eye on those distribution outlets and begin laying that groundwork so it's easier to approach them when the time comes. Also, I want to note that some independent bookstores will not carry books that are published through Amazon since Amazon has been so detrimental to their business. So keep that in mind as you start putting together your distribution plan. We've seen, especially around the holidays, you see people that will go into local bookstores, find a book they want, and then go to Amazon and buy it because it's cheaper or, whatever the reason is. But, a lot of local bookstores don't love that. They think that's not great. So I've, heard from bookstores in our area that they specifically do not carry books that are on KDP. Whatever your feelings are about that, it's just important to know these things and be considerate of the outlets and the distribution channels you're approaching to make sure that, what you're doing is in line with what they're looking for. So it'll be a bit easier of a sell for you. So then again, we have the brick-and-mortar stores. So of course, bookstores, libraries, and gift shops. And I want to just note that depending on your book, especially I think it's a bit easier for nonfiction books. So if you're writing a book that is maybe you are writing a book about health food or like how to kind of eat for your health sort of thing. Well, you're not limited to just bookstores and libraries. You can go to health food stores or even farmers markets or specialty food stores in your area. Talk to them about what you're doing and see if they can carry your book there. So I think that, looking for highly specialized things, or even maybe you wrote a book about like this, like this book, Why Dogs Are Better Than Cats, which, jury's out on that. We're not going to talk about that. I just thought it was a funny image, but heated debate could ensue. But if you wrote a book about pets or, maybe fostering animals or maybe how to train your puppy or something like that, then going to a pet shop and saying, hey, are you interested in carrying this and working out something that's mutually beneficial, that can be a great avenue and a way to really highly target exactly who you're looking for and exactly who your audience is. So as you're looking at distribution options, don't just limit yourself to what I have listed here. And especially when you're thinking about like physical retailers, bookstores and libraries, obviously those are kind of the go-to as you're starting out, but really challenge yourself to look in your book and the themes that you talk about and like the character journeys that they go on and what comes up so you can really highlight and, just find the best ways and the best avenues that you may have overlooked or that people wouldn't naturally think of to think of where your book can be and how to really find your audience and connect with them. And so this last piece on here that I want to touch on are direct sales. So these are really important. And I think regardless of where you publish and how you distribute, you want to be sure to include a direct sales method in your marketing efforts. As I mentioned before, we recommend to all of our authors to put your book everywhere your readers are in as many formats as you can, especially when you're just starting out. So that includes your website and social media channels. It's great that we live in a world with so many places you can sell your book. And if you're not thinking of your website or social media channels as one of those options, then you're really missing out. Selling direct has a plethora of benefits. And I've listed a couple ways here. So obviously, one of the first ones is selling in person. So if you have a speaking event that you went to, a speaking engagement, or you're at a conference and you have your books there, obviously hand selling is a great way to do that. You can collect a lot of information and then build those in-person relationships, which are all foreign to us at this point. But that's a way to do it. Another way is through your author website. So if you are publishing and you are interested in creating an author brand or successfully publishing, then you should have a website. And if you have a website, why not sell through it? The same with your social media channels. We see so many authors that work so hard to craft their brand, create a really nice website, have a great blog, have really active social media channels, engaging with their audience regularly, and then just kind of fumble when it comes to making the sale because you have to send them away to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or even Lulu's Bookstore to actually have that transaction go through. And when you're working so hard to build your audience and get their attention, why send them away? Why not just let them stay on your website or your social media channels and sell directly through those? So those are great options. And Lulu has two options for selling directly. So we have a print API and an app for Shopify that are both free. And you can find those on lulu.com/sell on your site. So those are some great ways to do it. As I said, they're free. And just to touch on some of the things that are really great about selling directly is that not only are you keeping them on your own website and you're owning that customer journey, which really puts you in the position of a business person and not just an author, then you're able to get transactional data. You're able to, really see who is buying your book and when, and you're able to keep more revenue per sale. So you're able to keep 100% of the revenue per sale if you're selling directly to your readers because you're cutting out the middleman. So I think that that's something that you should really be thoughtful or considering when you are looking at your distribution plan and how you want to put it together. So as I mentioned previously, this doesn't have to be either or. You can have your paperback on Amazon, you can have your hardcover on Lulu, and then you can have your books being sold directly through your website, through our platform, or you can always buy your books in bulk, sell them through your website, and then have those infamous packing parties and get the shipments out that way. So I will say that, using one of our solutions like our print API or our app for Shopify does rid you of inventory. You don't have to worry about that. So the print on demand model is extended to your shop through your social media channels or your author website. The order comes through that's transmitted to Lulu for print and fulfillment, and then it goes directly to your readers. So essentially, especially our API can act as a white label service. You can set up your Shopify to do that as well. So if you kind of take that next step for incorporating direct sales, then you're also acting as your own publisher. And you can kind of set up your own imprint that way as well. So if you have any questions about that, then we'll be happy to answer them. I know that we're kind of getting up to the end of our hour here, so I want to make sure we have room for questions. But I do just want to mention that as we look at the distribution piece, going wide is our recommendation for all of our authors. You want your books to be where your readers are. But I do see a lot of folks not taking advantage of the direct sales piece. So again, as I mentioned, whether that's in person, buying in bulk and selling through your website, which can also be nice because then you can do signed copies, put a little note in, have a bookmark that kind of directs your readers to your next book or your backlist, which can be really helpful. That's kind of a two-pronged approach. Or you can do these through your website, through an API or something that's printed on demand and kind of automate the process to make it a bit easier for you. And so that you can offer these things through your website or social media channels. So that's just a little bit about distribution, and that'll bring us to the end of our webinar for the most part today. I do want to note that next week we will be back here again, same bat time, same bat channel, and you can tune in for the next installment in our 4-part series here, and that's 5 publishing tips and tricks to sell more books. So I know that you guys have been active in the chat and some of our questions here. So we will go over. Oh, one thing I'll mention is, well, before you get into questions, so if you have any questions about what we talked about today, or if you just want to know what resources we have available, as we've alluded to, we try to make as many free resources available to our authors so that they can publish the best and most successful book every single time. So our blog is great. Paul is our blog writer, and it's lulu.com/blog, I believe. You can find us on all the social medias at lulu.com. And that exclamation mark, we were just over enthused. There's no exclamation mark in the handle, unfortunately, but there should be. So you can find us on social media at lulu.com, and also our YouTube channel. We have a ton of great resources on our YouTube channel, and we have a series called Lulu University that really kind of goes over all these topics and questions that we get asked from our authors on a regular basis. We've tried to serve up kind of concise little videos. I don't think any of them are longer than like 8 minutes that go into some of these answers and cover a wider range of topics. So without further ado, I will see if we have any questions that we want to answer that maybe didn't get answered in the chat.
So I think the majority of the questions we saw in the chat did get some good written out responses in there. One of the ones that I will touch on a little bit more, Christina had asked about bookstore buying and selling, right as you, Chelsea, were covering that. And that's just one to really be conscious of the individual bookstores' buying policies. So it's hard to give like a broad exact answer on that one. Most bookstores will want to buy through a catalog service, but you really have to go in and talk to the person that buys books in that individual bookstore to figure out exactly what their policy is and what they're willing to do. They may, if especially a small local bookstore, be willing to do commission sales or something, even if they haven't in the past. It just takes asking.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that kind of goes back to sort of what I mentioned about if you know that you're going to be writing a book and publishing, in the next 6 to 12 months, then go ahead and start researching these places and seeing if you can make those connections. Because we've talked to bookstores and independent bookstores especially, and it's just kind of jarring or I would even almost say disrespectful to have never set foot in a bookstore, independent bookstore, and then ask them to take a chance or roll the dice on your book. So another tip there would be if you are approaching these bookstores, then having a sell sheet or a short list of, if you can show any numbers on social media or any arenas that you're active in, or if you can prove at all that people are interested in your book and that you will bring traffic into that store, that's a great thing to do. So definitely you want to show or illustrate your ability to do that. Another thing to think about is, having activities, or if you, especially for children's books or things like that, it may be a bit easier, but author signings, things that you can do there that maybe in the book launch vein to just drive traffic to the store and highlight, not only the store, but also your book, and try to do that in concert so that, again, it is truly mutually beneficial. That may make it a bit easier as you approach those folks. So does anyone else have any questions that we did not answer? Now we have a couple minutes left, about 2 minutes. So we'll see if any other questions come through here. And then, like I said, so next week we have 2 more webinars in this series. So next week we'll go over tips and tricks to sell more books. And then the last one will be kind of just going through the Lulu platform and showing you from our perspective, how to publish on Lulu. Well, not our perspective, it'll be your perspective too, because there's only one way to do it. So we'll go through our platform, kind of go through some best practices of how to do that, so that by the time you leave this series, or if you've watched every episode, you will understand how to go from basically soup to nuts of your publishing journey. However, if there's anything that we've missed or that you would like us to touch on through this series, you can email us at webinars@lulu.com. And we'll be happy to take your suggestions, or again, any questions that maybe come up in between time. Charles, I see you're asking how do I connect to my Webinar Ninja account, but I have no answers for you there. I have no idea.
So I don't know that you need a Webinar Ninja account to watch these webinars. If you go to webinarninja.com, there should be a login option there. And when you log in, I believe, based on my own experience with trying to create an account so that we can host these, it will show past webinars that you've viewed. But I could be wrong about how it'll know that you've viewed, if it knows through your browser that you've watched one even before you had an account or not.
Yeah, and as a reminder, we'll be sending out the recording through email. So if you signed up for this, webinar, then you should be on a list to receive the recording once it is available, which there's usually a bit of a lag, but that should be later today. And then if you aren't on that list, or if for some reason you don't get the email, you can just go to our YouTube channel, and that recording will be posted by tomorrow at the latest. And Robert, I see this, I'll take this question, and then that should take us down to the hour. So will the recording include the chat dialogue? It will not. So we usually don't put that in there for when there are a lot of questions that we couldn't get to. We'll do a blog post roundup, but I think this one was pretty straightforward, and we were able to answer most of your questions. But if you have any others, anything that you did not get to, please just contact us at webinars@lulu.com, and we will do our best to answer you there. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope that this was helpful to you. Hopefully you're kind of one step closer and getting that full picture of what a publishing journey may look like. And, keep an eye out for the email. We'll see you next week at the same time. So thank you guys so much. I hope you have a great day.